What happens when a legendary music icon sits down for what should be a lighthearted morning chat, only to face a host determined to tear him down? In less than 40 seconds, a single loaded question would spiral into one of the most explosive confrontations in morning television history, exposing a host's entitlement and leaving a beloved star with no choice but to walk away. The morning began like any other on the popular daytime show. Studio lights burned bright, the audience settled and cameras ready to roll. Cliff Richard, the timeless voice behind generations of hits, adored across decades, had agreed to appear. He was there to talk about his new album, his upcoming tour, and maybe share a few warm memories from a remarkable career. It was supposed to be easy. It was supposed to be fun. But not today. Lorraine Kelly greeted Cliff with her usual polished smile as he stepped onto the set. The audience applauded. Cliff waved graciously, dressed sharply in a blazer and open-collared shirt. He took his seat beside the other panelists, a mix of commentators and guests ready to chat through the morning's stories. Everything seemed normal, almost. There was a subtle tension in the air. Lorraine's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and her tone carried a faint sharpness that everyone noticed. Eventually, Cliff would too. The interview began smoothly enough. Small talk, pleasantries, the sort of warm banter that keeps daytime television humming. Cliff answered every question with patience and charm, an old pro who knew exactly how to handle a camera. Then Lorraine leaned forward. Her voice softened, but her words cut deep. "So, Cliff," she began, "there's been a lot of talk lately about older artists still performing. Some people think maybe it's time for certain performers to step aside and let the younger generation shine. What do you think about that?" The air in the studio shifted. The audience fell silent. One of the panelists looked down at her notes. Uneasy. Cliff blinked, caught off guard, but recovered with grace. "Well," he said with a calm smile, "music is for everyone, isn't it? Age doesn't matter when it comes to passion or talent. I love what I do, and as long as the fans enjoy it, I'll keep doing it." It was a kind, grounded answer, but Lorraine wasn't done. Her next words came out cool and cutting. "Don't you think there's something a bit desperate about clinging to the spotlight when you're past your prime? You've had your time, haven't you?" The temperature in the room dropped. Even the crew stopped moving. The comedian on the panel, moments earlier laughing, fell silent. Cliff's polite smile disappeared. His voice stayed calm but firmer now. "I wouldn't call it desperate, Lorraine. I call it passion. I've been making music for over 60 years, and I'm proud of that. My fans are proud of that too." Lorraine waved a hand dismissively, almost scoffing. "Oh, come on, Cliff, let's be honest. Most of your fans are just nostalgic, middle-aged people clinging to the past. When was your last real hit? When was the last time anyone under 30 even knew who you were?" Gasps rippled through the audience. A panelist tried to interject. "Lorraine, maybe we should—" But Lorraine snapped. "I'm just asking the questions people actually think. Someone's got to be honest." Cliff exhaled slowly, visibly working to keep his composure. "Lorraine," he said evenly, "I came here to talk about my new album and tour. I didn't come here to be insulted. You're free to ask tough questions. But belittling someone's career because of their age? That's ageism, plain and simple." Lorraine laughed, a short, cold sound. "Ageism? Oh, don't be dramatic. You're not a victim, Cliff. You're just not relevant anymore. You had your run. Maybe it's time to let go." That was the breaking point. The comedian on the panel spoke up, voice tight but steady. "Lorraine, that's uncalled for. Sir Cliff Richard is a legend. He's sold over 250 million records. He's been knighted. Show some respect." Lorraine turned sharply. "Oh, so now you're defending him. Being around forever doesn't make you untouchable. This is my show. I'll ask whatever I want." The air crackled with tension. Cameras kept rolling, capturing every uncomfortable beat. Cliff looked straight at Lorraine, his calm now carrying real weight. "You know what, Lorraine? I've been in this business for a very long time. I've faced difficult questions, harsh critics, and tougher interviews than this. But in all my years, I have never been treated with such blatant disrespect. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence that followed said everything. Lorraine rolled her eyes, exhaling sharply. "Oh, here we go," she said. The victim card. Classic. Cliff shook his head, calm but disappointed. "This isn't about being a victim," he said evenly. "It's about basic courtesy. You invited me here as a guest. The least you could do is show a little respect. But clearly that's too much to ask." The entertainment reporter leaned forward nervously. "Maybe we should take a quick break." "We're not taking a break," Lorraine snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. "We're in the middle of an interview." That was the final straw. Cliff stood up. The movement was quiet, deliberate, and dignified. He unclipped his microphone, placed it gently on the couch, and looked directly at Lorraine. "No," he said calmly. "We're not. This interview is over." The entire studio froze. Even the hum of the cameras seemed to fade. Lorraine's face flushed crimson. "You can't just walk off my show," she barked. "Sit back down." Cliff gave a small, weary smile, one that carried sadness more than anger. "Actually, Lorraine," he said softly, "I can, and I will. I came here in good faith, to talk about music, to share something positive. But you made it clear you weren't interested in a conversation. You just wanted a spectacle, and I won't be part of that." No one moved. The panel sat frozen. The audience was silent, holding its collective breath. Lorraine rose to her feet, her voice rising with her. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're being oversensitive. It was just a few questions." Cliff turned fully to face her, his tone still composed but edged with unmistakable authority. "No, Lorraine," he said. "It wasn't just a few questions. It was a deliberate attempt to humiliate me on live television. You called me desperate. You mocked my fans. You laughed in my face. That's not journalism. It's cruelty." The comedian beside him stood, placing a reassuring hand on Cliff's shoulder. "Cliff," he said quietly, "you don't owe anyone an explanation. Everyone here can see who's in the wrong." The entertainment reporter nodded, her voice low but clear. "This has gone too far, Lorraine." Lorraine turned toward them, stunned to find no allies. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice wavering. "I was just doing my job." The comedian shook his head. "Your job," he said firmly, "is to interview guests, not attack them." "There's a difference." Cliff began walking toward the exit. Lorraine's voice followed him, sharp and desperate. "If you walk out that door, you'll regret it," she called after him. "Do you know how many people would kill to be on this show?" Cliff stopped, turned, and met her gaze one last time. "You know what, Lorraine?" he said quietly. "I don't think I will regret it. I think it's the best decision I could make. I've spent my whole life treating people with kindness and respect. I've never walked off an interview before. But there's a first time for everything. I'd rather walk away with my dignity than sit here and let you keep tearing me down." A few claps echoed from the back of the studio, then more. Within seconds, the entire audience was applauding. It wasn't just polite applause. It was solidarity. They were clapping for Cliff. Lorraine looked around, dazed as the realization set in. Her own audience had turned against her. "Oh, come on," she shouted over the applause. "You're all on his side now? He's the one walking out. He's the one being unprofessional." The entertainment reporter stood up, facing her. "Actually, Lorraine," she said evenly, "Sir Cliff has been nothing but professional. You're the one who crossed a line, and everyone here saw it." Lorraine's color drained. The panel wasn't backing her. The audience wasn't with her. The cameras were still rolling. Every second of her unraveling was being broadcast live. She turned toward the control room. "We need to cut to a commercial," she said quickly. The director's voice came through her earpiece, steady and unyielding. "We're staying live, Lorraine. This is happening." Cliff gave a small nod to the audience. "Thank you." he said sincerely. "That means a lot." He looked to the panel members. "And thank you for standing up when it mattered." Then he walked off the set. No drama, no storming out. Just quiet grace. His steps were steady, his head held high. As the studio doors closed behind him, the applause swelled, long, thunderous, defiant. The comedian turned back to Lorraine. His voice was low but cutting. "You just attacked a legend," he said. "A man who's done nothing but bring joy to people for 60 years. You did it for ratings, for controversy. Was it worth it?" Lorraine's throat tightened. "I was just asking tough questions," she murmured. The entertainment reporter shook her head slowly. "There's a difference between tough questions and personal attacks," she said. "And what you did today wasn't journalism. It was cruelty. Plain and simple." For the first time that morning, Lorraine had nothing left to say. The older panelist took a breath before speaking again, her tone gentle but cuttingly honest. "Lorraine," she said, "I've sat beside you on this show for years. I've seen you handle difficult guests, controversial topics, emotional interviews, always with grace. But today," she paused, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. "Today I didn't recognize you. That wasn't the Lorraine I know. That was someone trying to score cheap points at the expense of a guest. And it was wrong." The studio was thick with uneasy murmurs. The audience whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others still stunned, silent. The energy in the room had shifted completely. What had begun as another lighthearted morning broadcast had descended into a moment no one would forget. Lorraine looked around, her eyes darting from face to face, searching desperately for an ally. None came. Even the crew avoided her gaze. She had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. "He could have just answered the questions," Lorraine said finally, her voice brittle. "He didn't have to make such a big deal out of it." The comedian let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Are you serious?" he said. "You insulted him again and again. His career, his relevance, his fans. And you think he's the one who overreacted? Lorraine, come on. You created this. This is on you. Thanks for watching. Bye." The entertainment reporter muttered grimly, shaking her head. "And now the whole world's seen it. This is live television. There's no taking it back." Lorraine's hands trembled. The realization hit her in full. She had pushed too hard, too far. She had been cruel. Not clever, not bold. Just cruel. And now, in front of millions, she had driven away one of Britain's most beloved entertainers. Her own panel had turned against her. It was an on-air collapse, unfolding in real time. The older panelist spoke again, softer now, but her words still cut deep. "Lorraine," she said quietly, "you need to really reflect on this. It wasn't just a bad interview. It was a moment that showed a side of you people haven't seen before. And it's not a good look." Lorraine slowly sank back into her seat, her confidence shattered. She stared blankly at the cameras, at the audience, at the empty space Cliff had left behind. For the first time in her long career, she had no idea what to do next. No script, no charm, no way out. The comedian stood and unclipped his microphone. "You know what?" he said. "I don't think I want to be here anymore either. This isn't the show I signed up for." He walked off set. The entertainment reporter followed. Then the remaining panelists, one by one, each refusing to be part of what had just happened. Lorraine sat alone. The couch beside her was empty now, a silent monument to the disaster that had unfolded. The audience, once lively and warm, sat in stunned quiet, their faces filled with disbelief and disappointment. The cameras kept rolling. Lorraine tried to speak, to salvage something, anything, but no words came. What could she possibly say? The director's voice finally broke the silence. "Lorraine," he said softly through her earpiece, "we're cutting to commercial." The screen faded to black, but the damage was done. Within minutes, Clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media. The walkout, the applause, the stunned silence. Hashtags were already trending. Viewers were outraged. Commentators called it one of the most uncomfortable interviews in morning television history. The backlash was instant and fierce. Backstage, Cliff sat quietly as crew members approached him, visibly shaken. "Sir Cliff, we're so sorry," one of them said. "That was completely out of line. You handled it with such grace." Cliff offered a small, kind smile. "Thank you," he said gently. "It's not your fault. I just wish it hadn't come to that." His manager was already on the phone, fielding calls from networks and reporters. But Cliff himself was calm. He'd done what he needed to do. He'd stood up for himself. Without shouting, without bitterness, without cruelty. Meanwhile, back on set, Lorraine returned from commercial trying to continue the show, as if nothing had happened. But her voice shook. Her trademark warmth was gone. Every line sounded forced, every smile hollow. The magic was gone, replaced by an awkward, heavy tension. Viewers at home could see it. The control room could feel it. Even Lorraine knew it. Something inside her show had broken. When the final segment ended and the cameras stopped rolling, the studio emptied quickly. Crew members avoided eye contact. The laughter and chatter that usually filled the air were gone. Lorraine remained seated, motionless in the empty studio. The couch beside her was still vacant, the same place Cliff had walked away from. She had wanted a moment, a headline, proof she could still be bold, still be sharp. She got it. But the headlines weren't about hard-hitting journalism. They were about cruelty, about arrogance, about how Lorraine Kelly had gone too far and lost everything in the process. Meanwhile, outside, Cliff Richard stepped into the daylight surrounded by fans and reporters. He looked composed, his head high, his smile gentle. He had come to share music and joy, and instead faced hostility, but he never lashed out. He simply walked away with grace. And in that quiet act of dignity, he reminded everyone watching why he was, and always would be, a legend. The producers sat in silence for a long moment before anyone spoke. The walls of the conference room felt like they were closing in, the air thick with the weight of what had just happened. Finally, the executive producer broke the silence. His voice was low, deliberate, the tone of someone who knew he was presiding over a crisis. "All right," he said, rubbing his temples. "Let's call this what it is. That wasn't just a bad interview. That was a public meltdown." A junior producer tried to speak but stopped herself. The room was heavy with fear, not just for Lorraine's reputation, but for the show itself. Another senior producer leaned forward, her voice steady but cold. "We've worked for years to make this program a place where guests feel safe, where they want to come. What happened today shattered that." Cliff Richard walked off our set. "Do you understand how catastrophic that is?" Lorraine stood in the doorway, hesitant, listening before stepping inside. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. She looked smaller than usual. Not the confident morning host who could control a live audience, but a woman who suddenly seemed lost. The executive producer gestured toward an empty chair. "Sit down, Lorraine." She did. He folded his hands on the table. "Do you understand what's happening right now?" Lorraine swallowed hard. "Yes," she said quietly. "I know it looked bad, but I was just doing my job. I was trying to hold him accountable." "Accountable for what?" the senior producer interrupted sharply. "For being polite? For showing up?" "He wasn't a politician, Lorraine. He was here to talk about his music. You attacked him. You mocked him on live television." Lorraine opened her mouth to respond, but the executive producer cut in. "The network's already been on the phone. The clip's gone viral. We're trending across every platform, and not in a good way. Sponsors are calling. PR's in crisis mode. The morning shows in the US are already running segments on this." Lorraine stared down at the table. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "That's the problem," the senior producer said. You didn't think. You pushed and pushed until the man had no choice but to walk. You humiliated him, and now you've humiliated us. The assistant tried to diffuse the tension. Maybe if Lorraine issues a public apology. The executive producer sighed. That's the only option left, but even that might not be enough. He looked back at Lorraine. You need to decide how you want to handle this. Right now, because in an hour, every outlet in the country will be calling for a response. Lorraine finally looked up, eyes glassy. I'll apologize, she said. I'll say I went too far, that I let my emotions get the better of me. The senior producer nodded slightly, though her face stayed stern. Good. But remember this. Apologies only mean something when they come from a place of understanding, not desperation. You can't fake sincerity this time. People saw everything. There was a long silence. Then the executive producer stood. We'll draft a statement. You'll read it at the top of tomorrow's show. Calmly. No excuses. Lorraine nodded numbly. As she left the conference room, the hallway outside felt oppressively quiet. Crew members avoided her gaze. The usual morning chatter, the laughter, the hum of production. All gone. When she reached her dressing room again, she sat in front of the mirror. The lights were harsh now, showing every line, every flaw. For a long moment she just stared. Then she whispered to herself, barely audible. What have I done? Across town, meanwhile, Cliff Richard was sitting in the back of a quiet car as it drove through London. The city passed by in a blur. Grey sky, wet pavements, flashing lights. His manager was still on the phone, fielding calls from journalists. Cliff stared out the window, lost in thought. After a while, he said softly, You know, I don't think I'll ever go on that show again. His manager glanced at him. No one would blame you, Cliff. He smiled faintly. Still, I wish it hadn't come to this. There was a pause, and then he added almost to himself. Kindness costs nothing, but it means everything. The car disappeared into the London traffic. While back in the studio, Lorraine sat alone under the bright dressing room lights, realizing that the storm she had started was only just beginning. The executive producer sat at the head of the table, his expression grave, his fingers steepled in front of him. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. When Lorraine finally entered, her footsteps echoed in the tension-filled space. She looked smaller than usual. Deflated, uncertain. The chatter among the producers stopped instantly. She took her seat without a word. The executive producer drew in a long, weary breath. Lorraine, he began, his tone measured. We need to talk about what happened out there. That was not okay. That was not the kind of show we produce. And that was not the host we know you to be. Lorraine opened her mouth, but he raised a hand. Please, let me finish. He slid a stack of printed pages across the table. Viewer complaints, headlines, social media screenshots. We've received hundreds of complaints already. The network's phone lines are flooded. Social media is on fire. This is a PR catastrophe. Lorraine's voice was small, fragile. I was just trying to ask challenging questions. Isn't that what people want? Isn't that what makes compelling television? The executive producer shook his head slowly. There's a line, Lorraine. A big one. Challenging is not the same as attacking. You didn't challenge him. You belittled him. You laughed at him. You mocked his fans. You called his career irrelevant. That's not tough journalism. That's cruelty. He leaned forward, his tone hardening. And when your own panel walked off set, when they couldn't stand behind you, that told the whole story. Lorraine's eyes shimmered. I didn't mean for it to go that way, she said softly. I thought I was being bold, provocative. I thought it would make for good TV. The executive producer sighed deeply. Good television isn't about humiliation. It's about connection. It's about empathy. What happened today wasn't provocative. It was painful. You made the audience uncomfortable. You made them angry. And worst of all, you made them lose respect for you and for this show. The words sank in like stones. Lorraine said nothing. She didn't have to. The damage was already done. In another part of the building, the panel members who had walked off were gathered in a small lounge. The comedian sat scrolling through social media on his phone, shaking his head. "People are tearing Lorraine apart," he said. "But they're praising us for standing up for Cliff." The entertainment reporter nodded grimly. "Good. What she did was indefensible. I've worked with her for years, and I've never seen her behave like that. It was like watching a stranger." The older panelist, who had been quiet during most of the show, spoke gently but firmly. "Power changes people. Sometimes it makes them forget what matters. It makes them forget that respect is earned, not owed." The comedian set his phone down. "You know the worst part? Cliff Richard is one of the kindest, most decent people in the business. He's never been in scandals, never treated anyone badly. He's genuine, and she went after him like he was some villain. Why?" The entertainment reporter frowned. "I don't know. It felt personal, like she had something to prove. But against him? It doesn't make sense." The older panelist nodded slowly. "Maybe she was trying too hard, to stay relevant, to be seen as fearless. But she crossed the line. You can be sharp without being cruel. You can ask hard questions without tearing people down. She forgot that." They sat in silence for a moment, the reality of what had just happened settling around them. None of them knew what would come next, or if the show could even recover. By that evening, the story had spread everywhere. Entertainment networks ran the clip. News sites dissected every frame. Headlines screamed about the Cliff Richard walkout. Critics weighed in. Commentators debated whether Lorraine had finally gone too far. Some defended her, arguing she was simply doing her job. But those voices were drowned out by a tidal wave of outrage. The overwhelming consensus was clear. Lorraine Kelly had crossed a line. She had turned an interview into an ambush, and she had done so in front of millions. Cliff Richard, for his part, stayed silent. No statements, no interviews. He simply went home. His fans, however, did not stay quiet. They flooded social media with messages of support and love. They called him a class act. They praised his grace under pressure. They said he had done what anyone with dignity would do. He walked away. For Cliff, that support meant everything. Amid the noise, there was still warmth, still kindness. But for the show, the fallout was brutal. Ratings plummeted. Sponsors began to back away. Advertisers called the network demanding answers. The brand Lorraine had spent decades building, built on warmth, charm, and trust, had been tarnished in a single morning. It would take years to rebuild that trust, if it could ever be rebuilt at all. Lorraine Kelly had learned the lesson, the hardest way possible. In 38 seconds, one sneer, one ill-chosen question, she had set off a chain reaction that changed everything. She wanted to make headlines, and she did. But not as the fearless interviewer who asked tough questions. She became the host who went too far, the one who humiliated a national treasure, lost her panel's respect, and alienated her own audience. It was a story that would be studied in broadcasting courses for years. A cautionary tale about ego, empathy, and ethics. A reminder that power is fleeting, and platforms are privileges, not entitlements. And at the heart of it all stood Cliff Richard. Dignified, composed, unshaken, he would be remembered, not for walking off, but for walking away with grace. He came to share his music and left having taught a lesson, one more lasting than any hit single. His fans knew it, his peers knew it, and deep down, even Lorraine Kelly knew it. She had tried to diminish a legend, and instead, she had only diminished herself. That was the real tragedy of that morning. Not that a guest had walked off a show, but that a host had forgotten what it means to truly honor those who trust you with their stories, their time, and their presence.